So in continuing our theme, that I know you missed last week, of talking about the passions and their effect on our lives, today we're going to be going over two of them, so you can choose for the price of one. But what I wanted to begin with is to have you sort of call your mind back to the most recent Super Bowl that happened. So in one of the ads that they had during the Super Bowl, they were talking about love. And while they were trying to sell insurance, just ignore that for now. But they were talking about love, and they gave the different names for love and its different sort of qualities in Greek. And as we're looking at that, we start to realize how it has its effect on us, like what kind of love we experience at different points. And the one that I want to talk about is the love of desire, which is called eros in Greek. And we have to recognize, first and foremost, that when we say the phrase that God is love, we have to recognize that He's not just one, He is all of these things. So if we have a love that is based in desire, God has that as well. And we tend to misinterpret this because of our fallen nature. But the bottom line of it is that God desires us. And it's something fundamental to recognize about our faith, that more or less, God does not need you, which makes His love more incredible because He wants you. And this is the desire that is there. He wants you. He desires you to be close to Him. He desires your friendship. This is why Christ even called His disciples friends. Not just followers, not just people who are here following my word. Friends. And so as we have this same sort of love that can be inherent in us, we are meant to use it to desire God back. To desire to be close to God, to desire to have His grace to be a part of our life. And as always with the passions that we experience, this is sort of wrong. It is twisted in a way that is against what God had intended. And this is where we find the fundamental issue in some of the passions. And the two that are related to desire today that I wanted to talk about are both lust and gluttony. Now, we tend to think of them as something different because they more or less are not related in popular culture. Nobody's going to say that they stand on the same pillar. But what are they based in? It is in the recognition that you have to desire something, and that God put it in you for a reason. We are given a certain amount of desire so that we can find somebody to spend our lives with. I didn't just go out and pluck Pawnee from the bucket and say she's good enough. I desired to have her as my wife, and I chose that. And thankfully she chose me back. But this is the first fundamental part of this, is that we have to desire something. We have to want to seek it. God put this in us for a reason. This is why He gave Eve to Adam, so that he would not be alone, because He recognized it's not a good thing. And then secondly, when we have gluttony, we realize we have to desire to eat. If you didn't, you would just die. Correct? So, God had to put that in us, this recognition that we have to desire it. We have to chase it down. There is a part of our nous, which is our little anchor of connection to the divine, that is appetitive. That's how we get appetite. But it is that idea that we have to desire something, that we want it. And in a good way, it just means that we recognize when we are hungry, we eat, and we give thanks to God for it. But both of these things are turned out of their norm, out of their goodness that God has intended for us, and they become the passions that we know them as. That when you desire too much to have food, it now stops becoming just something that you need to survive. It starts to become something that you are desperately seeking more than anything else. And I know this firsthand. I grew up in a house where I had a mother and 3 sisters. There was no shortage of cookies in my house at all times. They loved baking. And so I still, to this day, just can't walk past a tray of them without grabbing at least 4. It's a desire. It's something against. I don't need them to survive. But it is constantly there that I have this appetite that cannot be controlled. And this is a part of it that I have to learn self-control over it. I have to exercise that. But it is something that has been twisted from me to recognize that there's something fundamental that I need that God is trying to make sure that I know. And now I start to place other things above my need for God. And that is what we have to focus on today. All of the passions are meant to turn us away from God And we've talked about how the other ones do that so far. But in this regard, as we look at desire, specifically in the passions of gluttony and lust, we have to recognize that that desire, when out of control, makes us want something more than God. And that is something that, to a certain extent, we have to always be watchful of, that we have to be aware of in our lives. And I didn't plan this part, so you have to bear with me. But God tends to constantly love to put things in my lap that recognize it. So I will use an example that occurred to me because he's here. I love coffee, and I'm sure all of you know this. You can ask Pawnee about how desperately I love it. And I once drank so much of it in seminary that I almost passed out in class and realized I had to cut back. I'd had a lot that day. I tried to number it out once and it was absurd. So I gave up coffee, and I went to camp, and I'd given up coffee. And I remember that Father Stephen said, "Oh, you gave up coffee? I need to as well. I'll do it with you." And it was awesome. And I was like, "Well, why?" And he told me one thing, and I remember it to this day. And this is what God has sort of put into my lap, so that all of you can share this with me. He said that the day that I need something is the day that I know I should give it up. And that is how I've always looked at it. This is how we base our fasting. If I say I need something in my life, I should separate myself from it. It can be a good thing. And coffee's not evil in and of itself. But the moment that I need it, because I can't get through my day without it, is the moment that that thing has taken the place of God. I can't get through my day without God. I can definitely get through a day without coffee. It might just be hard for a while. But it's something to recognize that when those things take that place of God, we have to be able to recognize it. We have to realize when we've gone astray. And so, as you continue to live, and why I'm trying to empower you with these sermons about the passions, is so that you can recognize it. So that your eyes can be opened and you can see these things acting in your life. That if you have that desire for something, make sure it is focused on God. Make sure that it's a step below your need for the grace of God in your life. Which is why we come here every Sunday. To keep making sure that God and our need for Him is at the very beginning and center of our week and our lives. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Christ is in our midst.
He is and always shall be.